Napoleon's Buttons, 17 Molecules That Changed History, by Penny LeCourtier and J. Burrison, by Rachel Sparks. This book, contrary to its title, is not very much about Napoleon Bonaparte or his buttons. It is, however, about 17 different molecules that have had major and minor effects on history. It is a beautiful blending of both history and chemistry, and showing how different each molecule is, but have somehow managed to be the reason behind each new discovery of these molecules. Each chapter is devoted to explaining each molecule and how it came to historical significance, major players in discovering the molecules and the evolution of their discoveries, and the chemistry behind it and their important effects on history. The relevance to the Biology 100 class is very many. Throughout the whole book, it's talking about chemistry, which relates especially to our chapter on chemistry of life, because in every single chapter it explains the chemistry of the molecule, and it breaks it down and shows how each molecule was found and the chemistry behind it and the evolution of those chemicals. There are, however, some chapters in particular that have greater reference. Chapter 11, for instance, the pill, has greatly to do with our talking on reproduction and the types of contraceptive that may be blocking that ability to be able to reproduce, and the chemicals that have to do with blocking those abilities. The other chapter has to do with wonder drugs from this book. It relates to our units on plants and bacteria, and especially focusing in on microbial life and the chemicals that can be found within plants that can help humans to be able to overcome diseases and many other sorts of ailments. The first chapter, Peppers, Nutmeg, and Cloves, has to do a lot with the spice trade and what that looked like between Europe and especially Asia, without so much as between South America. That is, until Columbus came. The only reason that Columbus even found North America and South America was because he was looking for a faster trade route between Europe and Asia. The spices mentioned in this chapter, peppers, nutmeg, and cloves, have a lot in common, but mostly molecularly. They all have similar structures, and in turn, all have a sort of hotness, is actually a reaction of pain-inducing nerves because of chemicals within these spices that look incredibly similar. The molecules found in these spices, pepper, chili pepper, and ginger, increase endorphins in the brain, saying there is pain in the hotness. But not only that, they increase the making of saliva, which helps with digestion and the movement of food throughout the body. The next chapter talks about ascorbic acid, otherwise known as vitamin C. It was thought to be first used by Vikings when they were traveling to America from Greenland. This tiny molecule, which we take occasionally, hopefully every day, can be found in huge varieties of fruits and vegetables, and it was often used to fight off scurvy in sailors. This whole chapter mostly talks about the whole fight between scurvy and sailors, and how one captain actually thought well enough ahead to have his sailors take 3 teaspoons of lemon juice a day and keep their hygiene up to be able to ward off scurvy while they were sailing on those long months. Something I found interesting was that the C in vitamin C actually means that it was the 3rd vitamin ever to be identified. Among mammals, only primates, guinea pigs, and the Indian fruit bat require vitamin C in their diet, and that is including humans. In all other vertebrates, the family of dog or cat, the ascorbic acid is made in their liver from simple sugar glucose by a series of 4 reactions, and they're all catalyzed by an enzyme. Because of these findings, more people today can be spared of the effects of scurvy and can live now knowing that taking vitamin C throughout their day can boost their immune system, help to produce collagen, and helps the connecting tissue in their bodies. The next chapter talks mostly about glucose and how it comes from different kinds of sugars and how it's a molecule that comes from sucrose. In this chapter, it talks about how sugar was mainly responsible for fueling the slave trade, and because of this, it helped spur the economy in Europe at this time because of how much of a demand there was on sugar. Sugar is essentially just sucrose extracted from plants, in which glucose is the main component. Glucose is very important to humans because it helps to give energy, which is used for fuel when working and living, as well as making up cells. Sugar is used in essentially everything that is consumed today, and without it, much of what is tasted would be very different, and much of what the food we see today would not exist the way it does. The next chapter talks about cellulose and finding that in cotton plants. Because cotton can only grow under very specific conditions, such as moist, well-drained soil, hot and long summers, and a moist atmosphere to help the cotton fibers stick together, which was easier in when manufacturing the cotton, and it meant less threads would be breaking during the spinning and weaving process. This chapter talks a lot about the structure of the polysaccharides and the glucose units that make up these cellulose strands. The next chapter has to deal with nitro compounds, mainly found in gunpowder. Gunpowder was made up of sulfur, nitrate salt, and carbon. The next chapter has to do with silk and nylon and the invention of new kinds of clothing that were made from silkworm cocoons, such as these in this picture here. These are racks of cocoons of silk, and some of these silk could be spun out and can reach lengths of 400 to 3,000 yards. Stories of silk were first heard around 2640 BC in ancient China in stories surrounding the life of the simple silkworm. The silkworm in China and silk production were hugely important because they helped to revolutionize and create the Silk Road, which gave new forms of travel and trade routes between Asia and Europe at that time. This next chapter is on phenol. Phenol is an interesting compound because it can come in many different forms. The first form that it was found in was in carbolic acid and was used as an antiseptic in surgical school by physician Joseph Lister. It was later discovered that this form of phenol, this crude carbolic acid, was actually very poisonous, especially if taken through the air. It can also cause skin irritations and burns, and was later discontinued in use when other stronger antiseptics were created. Phenol is also greatly important because it is what was seen as the beginning of the age of plastic. Because before, things like billiard balls and other things were created using ivory from elephant tusks were being quickly used up, and so different forms were having to take shape. Young Leo Baekeland, a young Belgian, discovered a new way of creating what he called was plastic. In this, he was able to melt it down and form different things, like this radio that you see and these different forms of photo paper that he later sold to Kodak. Phenol not only helps to create plastic, but also is still found in some of the spices we talked about earlier, and is seen as a strong kind of flavor, and is also found in vanilla and helped to create the synthetic vanilla market. This next chapter is on isoprene, found naturally in the rubber of trees, in certain kinds of trees in South America, and later went on to be made into tires by one Charles Goodyear. He figured out by melting it in a certain way and then hardening it again, he could get the consistency of a hard tire. This next chapter talks about dyes and their importance in all kinds of ways of life. This was in the trade routes and traveling between countries. Most of the ancient dyes were similar in compounds and molecules, but depending on the presence of oxygen, hydrogen, and certain acids, they would change their color. This last chapter that I'll be able to talk about from the book is talking about wonder drugs, one of the most important chapters of the book in my opinion, and it really has to do with our chemical unit and plant unit in the class. This one really went into detail about talking about the creation of aspirin and where it came from the willow bark and willow leaves and different kinds of plants. It also talked about the creation of penicillin and different antibiotics that were created from different kinds of mold. It talks about using aspirin and the compounds found in salicylic acid that can be even ground down further into acetyl salicylic acid, which was a more safe form of this acid, which can be later seen as what we see now as today as our modern day aspirin. As you can see, there are many other chapters in this book that I found quite interesting, especially on the morphine, nicotine, and caffeine, and talking about the trade routes between those two, and what damages that it does to the humans, and what types of things that have impacted those production and the ways that they have impacted humans. The other chapter was oleic acid, which is found in olives. Another chapter was on salt, and how it can help in our body, but also can cause great damage if there's too much taken. Another chapter was on chlorocarbons compounds, which are found in refrigerators nowadays. And in the map to the right, you see the route taken by many different people getting to South America from the north carrying ice. And this is my sources. I encourage you to read this book for yourself to find even more clues and hints and evidence to show how these molecules have completely revolutionized our history and the world we see today. Because if without these findings, the world we see today would not look the same. Thank you for watching.